what is happening in terms of gender ideology in your country?
I want to explain to all attendees that the situation in Spain is quite worrying at the moment, because we have a brand new left-wing coalition government. They were elected at the end of last year and have begun being an official government at the beginning of the year. And it is a coalition, like I said, left-wing. It's a socialist party, very similar to what's Labour in the UK, and a new party that arose from the Occupy movement in 2015. And that party is the forefront of the woke movement in Spain. That party is called Podemos, which translates as "we can." I think they took that from the Obama campaign. And during the campaign for these general elections, like I said, it's very, very new, very recent. Both parties referred in their campaign that there was a need for reforming the current law that allows transgender people to change their legal status on ID cards or passports, etc. And Podemos, like I said, that's the party that's the wokest party in Spain. They specifically stated that they wanted to allow self-ID into law in Spain. That was part of their political program. So when they were negotiating for building the coalition and to form government, Podemos asked especially for equality, and they got it. So now the ministry, the Secretary for Equality is in their hands. And they have appointed as Director General for Women, a woman. She's a lesbian, she's an LGBT activist, but she's very much in favor of current transgender ideology. Most people in Spain are not aware that this same party, Podemos, they already tried to pass self-ID into Spanish law in the previous term, when the Popular Party, which is right-wing party, when they were in government, because in our parliament, the Podemos registered a proposal for self-ID in March of 2018. I myself learned about this when I learned about the proposed changes in British legislation. So after I was aware of this issue and began reading and investigating about it, then I found out that in Spain we were having the same situation our British sisters were having, but I didn't know about it until then. So luckily, since the government was weak, there was some changes, and there was a call for earlier elections. Then the parliament was dissolved, and all proposals that were not finished and they were not passed into law then decayed. So that proposal presented in March of 2018 decayed, but they thought they would have it approved, so we could have that self-ID made into Spanish law without any debate, any campaign, and feminists didn't know about it until very, very recently. So now they're in government, it's most likely that they will have another go, because they are, like I said, the ruling party. I have to tell you that it is not uncommon that they will use some other proposals in order to introduce gender identity, like is happening in other countries. So here in March, just a month ago, there was a draft of legislation in order to make into law or to reinforce the concept of consent. So rape and other sexual violence against women would have a harder punishment. But then in that law, which had nothing to do with the transgender issues, they had devoted a whole article to explain some queer theory concepts like gender identity and all that. Luckily, there was a leak, and the text of that draft was leaked into social media, and there was some uproar. Feminists complained because like I said, the situation in 2020 is much different from what it was 2 years ago, when there was no awareness about this issue. So they removed that article. Now it's not as strong as it was, but some remains are left in the text to acknowledge that. So for instance, there's an article, it's a part of an article 2.5 that is devoted to address sexual violence against women specifically. And then in that article, as an intersectional axis of oppression among age or migrant status, social class, they include gender identity. And that is just a draft proposal from 1 month ago. So there's other worrying issues going on, because they know they have the support of the current government, the major LGBT lobby. They launched a social media campaign on March 31st on Trans Visibility Day. And there was one of the cases was a regular guy, short hair with glasses. He wore a pink shirt, that's the only thing. And he would be read as a male in every country on earth. And he stated clearly that he was a woman and he was the mother of his 4 children. So that person in itself is not important, but he was chosen to represent that kind of new idea of self-ID, that nothing is needed and you don't have even to try to pass or pretend that you're a woman.
So, you know, the situation in Argentina is really bad. We have Gender Identity Act since 2012 and a very hard version of this act. Gender identity is recognized by law without any requirement. We don't need surgeries or treatment, psychological treatment, nor diagnosis, anything at all, just your decision and your explanation that you are a person of other sex. So the gender identity is registered as sex in the birth certificate. There is no record of that, so you change your sex in the birth certificate off the record. Nobody can know or be public this issue. And about kids, they are allowed to change the ID as well. Last year we have several cases of children about 4, 5, and 6 years old that changed their ID because they were supposed to be transgenders at 5 years old. So we have many cases like that. Since 11, they can use blockers. And since 13 or 14 or 13, I'm not sure, but about that, they can use hormones. So, well, that is the situation in our country. And this ideology is pervading everything, is pervading the huge feminism in the country. Now we have a new ministry since this year, because this year the government changed, so we have a new government and a new ministry of women, gender, and diversity. But it's more diversity than women. But at least they keep the name women, at least.
So regarding the transgender issue in Croatia, we have had for a long time a conservative government, so the trans activists didn't have much space to introduce their politics. Although they are trying, they have their organizations and stuff, but it's really unlikely that they will have the gender ID, self-ID established very soon, I have to say that. The rights they have now in Croatia, they can change sex on their ID, but they need to have a medical condition. They have to have a gender dysphoria diagnosed. And after that, they need to live in another gender for some time. And then they can apply to National Committee, Medical National Committee, that can approve their status. And after they do that, then they can change their sex legally in documents. So the whole procedure is gatekept by the right wing very much, because our medical establishment is very much under the Catholic Church, under the right wing organizations. So it is very problematic for them to succeed in all that. According to Croatian media, there's an approximation that there are only 50 transgender persons in Croatia by now. And also they can't have any surgeries done here, but they can go to Serbia, which is our neighboring country, where they can do surgeries, and that costs like something like 10,000 euros. And regarding the kids, they can have a hormone therapy as young as 9, although the youngest documented, at least in media, case is 12 years old, but they need to have permission by their parents.
Hi everyone. Here in Brazil, the key year was 2013, when the two big left parties here tried to a bill called Projeto de Lei João Nery. It was a bill to, it was just like GRA in UK or the Argentina law of gender identity. Although this law project wasn't until now really approved, it was really important in order to tell left people in Brazil, progressive people, that gender identity was a good thing, was a thing that all of us progressive people should respect, just like sexual orientation. So this law project was really important. Plus, although it wasn't approved until now, because usually our Congress has more conservative people than progressive people. The point is, here in Brazil, there are many other forms in order you can, trans activists or no, a person who thinks belongs to the opposite sex can keep their rights. One of them is state laws. So even we do not have this federal gender identity law as trans activists would like, we do have many state laws that assure things like bathrooms and in schools or in everywhere or in shops or changing rooms. So we do have this. Plus, we do have medical laws, how can I say, these norms, administrative laws from our Federal Council of Doctors. It's not really a federal law, but this is a kind of minor law that allows, for instance, that kids are being medicalized since 2013. We always have our system, according to our system, judges, they can do many things they want, even when we do not have a specific law. So our Supreme Court, we say Supremo Tribunal Federal, which is like Supreme Court, in 2018 decided that any person here can change their documents, including sex, whenever they want, without surgeries, without a medical diagnosis, just like the Argentina law. So any person can do whenever they want to, even without this federal law. Our Supreme Court said they just can't. Last year, our Supreme Court, one minister of the Supreme Court said that men who claim be women can be on feminine cells. So at least since 2019, any man that claims he's a woman can be on feminine cell with prisoners, with female prisoners, even keeping their cocks. So the situation here is very, very bad, not only because they can do mostly everything they want, but because this, even talking, I can talk about this later, but because even talking all these years with a lot of feminists here are very attached to left parties. They are very submissive to left parties, you know? So they do not want to go against their parties. Usually they are affiliate of these parties, or they have another kind of connection, or they are too afraid of being seen as conservatives. So it's very hard dealing with this.
So in Australia, we do have gender ideology, which has been approved at both federal and state legislation. So we recently had in the state of Victoria, there were express provisions made for sex self-ID, which means that anyone can now go to the Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages and apply for a change of their gender, which will enable them to change their sex on their birth certificate with nothing more than 2 statutory declarations signed by 2 other adults. And then, so that means that there's no gatekeeping, there's no safeguarding, there's no assessment. And these provisions have also been pushed through in the state of Tasmania, and we have no doubt that the activists are working to push through express legislations in other states. So at the federal level in Australia, you are able to change your gender on your birth certificate. So you're able to apply for that to the sex of your choice with nothing more than a note from your doctor. So effectively, we do have sex self-ID in Australia. And then we also have a really great piece of legislation called the Sex Discrimination Act, which was enacted in 1984, and it prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex. Then in 2013, they made some amendments where the definition of man and woman were removed from the legislation. There is no definition of sex in the legislation. However, there's a definition of gender. So they put in some provisions that protect gender identity. And the definition for that is basically, I mean, it is a definition, but it's not really defined because it's circular, it's based on sex stereotypes, and it's, effectively it's meaningless. So we have this tension where we have protections for sex and we also have protections for gender identity. So on the one hand, you can have exemptions in relation to sex discrimination. So that's in terms of workplaces and certain things like that. But then on the other hand, you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So I think until we have some test cases in the federal, in the High Court, we won't actually know what that means, because I think they're in definite conflict. And then also this is fed down into policy in education and sports. So we do have exclusions in sports. However, you can discriminate on the basis of sex, but you can't discriminate on the basis of gender identity. So we could exclude you on the basis that you're a biological male, but we can't exclude you on the basis of being a trans woman. So there's this inherent conflicts that is unresolved. We've also got quite a lot of policy where it looks like they're piggybacking off other things like same-sex marriage, which I understand happened in other jurisdictions, like in Ireland. And in relation to, say, education, they promote the gender ideology within the education system. And if you have a child who identifies as trans, no other child is allowed to raise a concern in terms of same-sex in terms of sex segregated provisions of toilets and overnight accommodation and things like that. And if a child does raise an objection, they will be sent off to, I think it was Student Learning Services. so we can all sort of surmise what that means. We also have at the federal level, the Yogyakarta principles were categorically dismissed by our Senate, which is encouraging, and they said it has no legal force either internationally or within Australia. However, on the other hand, the Senate also had last year on November 19, which was the Transgender Awareness Day of some description, where they had the entire Senate vote in favour of a motion that was effectively just transgender ideology and promoting trans rights, promoting the voices of trans people and ending discrimination against trans people, which is a bit of a nullity because they're already protected by our federal legislation. So to see an endorsement of our entire Senate body, aside from 3 very controversial, very right-wing politicians, was really quite distressing.
So in terms of background, this document, which I hope you've all read and memorised, was published in November, sponsored by Dentons, one of the largest law firms in the world. And this is a manual for transgender activists. And the main message that we took from this was that the way to get legislation on self-ID through in any country is not to tell anybody that you're actually doing it. And that appears to be how it's been done, certainly in Ireland, where it was added in along with same-sex marriage at the last minute. It seems that nobody in Canada knew it was actually going to happen. I'd love to learn more about Argentina and Brazil because I simply don't know what happened there. But that has driven all our thinking about self-ID in the UK and how we approach it. And the most important thing is to expose it, to challenge it, to shine a light on it. Because these people, that they specifically say, whatever you do, keep out of the press. Do not get into discussions about self-ID. Why? Because every single one of us and every single person on this call knows that once you say to somebody, what's gender identity? There is nothing there. It is meaningless. It is unscientific. So first thing that we've learned is shine a light on it. Wherever someone is saying self-ID, push them, question them, challenge them. Second, Katherine mentioned Yogyakarta principles, and because it is the foundation of so much of the nonsense, even though it has no legal status, as Katherine's just said, it underlies so much of the changes in the law and the changes in people's thinking. We're lucky, we have our own YP expert in our group who's Fatina. So instead of call Saul, we call Fatina if we ever want to know what clause or subclause or whatever. And it is astonishing that I think it's clause 31 in the YP actually says that there should be no recording of sex in any shape or form on any legal documents in any country anywhere. So it's clearly the work of people who are on a different planet, and again, like exposing pushes for self-ID and what it actually means, we must push for people to understand YP plus 10, but also to expose it because it's often quoted as best practice. Very quickly, England was brilliant. We had a consultation in 2018. The government had never, ever had as many responses. I think it was 100,000. And these are the individual women in the UK who are so angry about what's going on, and they were organising across the country. And that consultation will be reported on in the summer, but we're confident that the GRA will not be reformed. And we just won a huge battle in Scotland where self-ID was put forward on December the 13th, 14th, I think, and withdrawn last month. And we were engaged with lots of Scottish women's groups to push back on that. And we feel that as LGB Alliance, that was the first victory that we were part of.